Hi, thanks for joining us for this session on what does the short-term and long-term of office environments look like. We're going to be talking about not just architectural issues, but also AV and technology issues, as well as engineering issues that can be addressed in both the short-term and the long-term. So let's go to the next slide. So it's always hard to predict the future, but we all want to be prepared for it. Recent Zoom conference calls that I've had with facility manager professionals brought out some key issues on how organizations are going to have to prepare for the gradual phased-in occupancy of their buildings. We also have been discussing what the new normal might look like a year from now, and when a vaccine for coronavirus is readily available. So one of the first things I want to address is the screening of staff and visitors, having an outer ring of security, and I'll touch on technologies and products, and that'll lead right into the AV discussion. So let's go to the next slide. So as we gradually move staff back into the work environment, there will need to be some level of health testing of employees, consultants, and visitors before they enter your workspace. This would probably be handled outside of the organization where testing may become readily available. We can only hope that local pharmacies and doctors' offices will start testing on a more frequent basis. Some type of documentation is probably going to be needed to show that you're not a carrier of COVID-19, or that you've had it and you have some level of immunity due to antibodies. This testing and documentation will have to be updated on a regular basis. The caution for this process is that the coronavirus test is not always accurate. I've been hearing statistics like 40% accurate, 50% accurate. So that's not necessarily a guarantee that the person entering your facility is not a carrier. But WB Engineering is going to be touching on some of these technologies in a couple minutes. So when it comes to creating an outer ring of security, for checking this documentation, that might already be in place in your facility if you have a security service. If not, that may be an additional expense. Products are being developed using ultraviolet light that can kill the coronavirus. There was a tenant in the Fair Lakes area. There was I think it was a PR firm that is using this light portal, which is shown here in that illustration on the right-hand side, that can be, part of your security system. And basically, the person steps inside of this portal, they turn around slowly, and basically it gets rid of the coronavirus using the UVC light. That same technology can be used in UVC cleaners for cell phones, small packages, pieces of paper, to sanitize them before going, into your facility. So if you see that photograph on the lower middle, that's an example of a UVC cleaner. Clean Slate is one of the manufacturers that makes those. One caution, and you'll probably hear WB Engineering talk about this, is that UVC, light can cause cancer. If you have prolonged exposure. So, there's other applications for that light, and they'll be talking about that in a little bit. And certainly, putting in sanitizers throughout the office, you'll probably be doing more of that, not just at your entry, but wherever there's an exit door, wherever there's a pantry, you'll probably have more and more of these hand sanitizer stations. Also putting up plexiglass or Lexan panels around lower workstations. So let's just say you have a 44-inch high workstation panel. You may want to put in a 24-inch high plexiglass, Lexan, or glass like sneeze guard that you typically would have at a restaurant, or grocery stores have that at cashier stations now. But there are companies out there that are fabricating those, for your workstations, reception areas, reception desks. And there's they do come with a price. They're not cheap. So let's go to the next slide. So getting to work, that's going to be a big issue. And people are going to be hesitant to use public transportation, due to social distancing, and which ultimately means that roads are going to be jammed up with traffic again, maybe even worse than your typical rush hour pre-COVID. And parking is going to be a problem. And the reason I say that is, number one, people are not going to want to, be in close proximity to other people in buses and trains. There's probably going to have to be a limited number of people on the platform at any given time, so there's going to be long lines to get onto buses, to get onto train platforms. It can be a real mess. It can really extend the commuting time. So people will most likely, want to drive into work. And again, not only is that going to create massive traffic jams on highways, but it's going to create a parking problem once you get to the area where you're heading. So what you may want to do, you may want to send out a Survey Monkey survey to your staff to find out how people plan to get to work, just to get a sense of what their plans are. And maybe you stagger it so that they arrive not during rush hour time or before rush hour time. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide. So one of the things I wanted to bring up here is a quick sort of short-term solution, or several short-term solutions that you may need to implement at the time that you start bringing people back in the office. If you have a lot of systems, furniture, configurations where people are in close proximity to each other, you may have to occupy every other workstation. What you could do, as this illustration is showing, you may want to just reconfigure your computer equipment location and seating and maybe pedestals so that people can be facing away from each other, and potentially increasing that social distancing. So in this example here, in the 6-foot by 8-foot workstations, where people are facing each other, they only have about 6 feet in between themselves. Whereas if you just turn them around and move their computer equipment, you're increasing that 6 feet to 10 feet. And then you can also add those 2-foot high panels on top of the 44-inch high panels in this example to create an additional barrier. So it may not necessarily be as effective as we may think, but it's at least a psychological addition that will make people feel safer. The example I'm showing up in the upper right-hand corner is, how can you still do social distancing and still have a collaborative meeting? Whether it's in an interior conference room where you take out every third seat, or you just remove 2 out of 3 chairs, that certainly will help an interior conference room situation. It's always best to have a conference where there's a lot of air exchange. WB Engineering will be talking more about that. In this case here, it's showing an outdoor seating area. That could be a rooftop terrace in your building. It could be an outdoor area that's on grade, but having outdoor meetings during nice weather is certainly a much preferable situation, just because of the air exchanges. So let's go to the next slide. Also, cleaning protocols, will need to be changed in terms of, wiping down keyboards and things that people touch, such as door hardware, elevator keypads. I think eventually, in terms of the new workplace, I think what we'll be seeing more and more of is touchless door hardware, touchless elevator controls. Just like we did 20 years ago when it came to lavatory faucets. I think we'll be in sort of a touchless society even after COVID has run its course. So, what is going to be the
video conferencing, and everyone is getting very comfortable with it. Another good pro is that the cost has gone down. So historically, it was very expensive to get into video conferencing. You had to buy big boxes from Polycom or Cisco and spend $10,000–$15,000 per station. Everyone can join with their computer, their mobile device, their iPad. So it's become free. A lot of companies during this epidemic have extended their free licensing. So people that have never tried hosting Zoom or starting a Zoom meeting went to their website and created an account and was hosting free meetings in under 10 minutes. So, being able to get into these platforms and getting extended licensing and extended free capabilities is a great way that people are starting to feel more comfortable becoming hosts of meetings and not just an attendee. One of the other things that you've probably noticed from working from home is how much of an impact and burden it's been on your IT department. So a big part of that is, some companies were more prepared than others. So some companies are very localized, right? So everything is based on your on-premise, your local network drives, local network shares, and it probably took a lot of adaptation from your company to get used to being able to work from home. So having the remote attendee, maybe every person didn't have a laptop, so people only had desktops, so they had no way of connecting to their office, right? So it really opened up the window in terms of understanding, hey, we do need to have flexibility to have every employee have the ability to work from home efficiently, right? So that means we need VPN connections so that every user can connect to the network and it not get bogged down. We need to maintain speeds. We need to maintain efficiency. We need to be able to access all our files and software, right? So I've seen many companies shift during this epidemic to cloud hosted, right? So instead of hosting everything locally within your office space and your server room, you're hosting it in the cloud with Dropbox, OneDrive, or similar platforms where everyone's able to access everything at full speed, right? So you don't have any loss of people sharing, saving things on their desktop and losing files. Everything is cloud hosted, cloud backed up. So, as I said, some companies were more prepared than others, but by this point, we're like week 9 in, pretty much everyone has a system now, right? So everyone has a way to share content, to save files, to access files, to get to their software, and to connect to their workplace. So you see that it was a slow curve in the beginning, and now the efficiency's up, right? So the work from home has become almost a standard. John, why don't you touch on some cons?
Sure thing. So I'm John with NTI. And so a few of the cons right off the bat is, when you're dealing with high priority meetings, whether that be a conference call with a client or a meeting with a potential vendor or a tenant, whatever it may be, you're dealing with a high priority meeting. I mean, that means a lot to your company or it means a lot to you as an individual. And shifting from having the availability to do this in person, you're having to do this via one of the conferencing platforms. And so there is that margin of error, whether by the user or by the technology, where something could go wrong. Thankfully, nothing's gone wrong during this presentation, but there's always that chance that there could be some glitch in the system. No system is perfect. And so there is that margin of error that could significantly affect high priority meetings. Another one is fear of office spaces becoming less relevant, right? So we're seeing just due to the pandemic that companies had to jumpstart this work from home option. They had to immediately start it, and people had to make it work. And so you're seeing, we weren't sure in the beginning if this was going to be something that would work well for companies. But the overall response is that it works, and it's been working for a lot of companies in a lot of different industries. A recent example would be Twitter. Not sure if any of you noticed, but they recently announced that work from home is a permanent option for any employee going forward. So even once the pandemic is over, there is this option for employees to work from home indefinitely. And so it'll be interesting to see how that shifts and changes with more companies maybe joining in or fighting back and saying, no, we need to be in the office. We need to have that personal connection and communication. But either way, that is going to have a significant impact on AV and the systems we use and the technology we use. And of course, the increase in all this technology is going to most definitely continue going forward, even with people moving back into their office. Nuvan, if you want to touch on some of the permanent changes now.
The summary is, overall, Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, like I said, it was a little bit of a learning curve. People are getting started into it, but it's a permanent thing. It's here to stay. Finally, it's kind of ripping the Band-Aid off. If you weren't comfortable with the platform in the past, you are now. And it will be a standard, right? So people that were traveling to New York daily or across the country, even us, NTI, we remained open during the entire, epidemic, as we are a construction company. So, our operations team ran daily, all our technicians still in the field. So, we see that you need to continue operating, and we ran all our office staff from home. And video conferencing was a daily thing. So audio and video conferencing is here to stay. And it's going to be an expectation for you to be able to have a camera to be able to turn on and be able to join the meeting and be a very personal meeting. You also want to make sure you get very comfortable with Teams and Zoom. Those are the two platforms that are the most popular. So they are being integrated into a lot of room systems for one-touch joining, one-touch operation. So make sure you get very comfortable with them, because they will be either a daily or at least weekly occurrence from here on out. So that's about it from our end. So any questions, you can jump into breakout room 2 after this webinar. And I'm just gonna hand it off to Greg with WB Engineering.
Yvonne, thank you. So Ray and I are going to talk to you all about proactive measures that can be taken in the short term and the long term to help fight COVID-19 and other indoor air quality issues that have come to the forefront through the past 10 or 11 weeks. The first is cleaning, right? So this is the thing that is a no-brainer. Electrostatic precipitation and halo foggers to ready your facilities for the return to work. It's a great place to start. It helps folks feel good when they see this gentleman in the suit and spraying this mist, and know that that was done before they all returned back to the workplace. However, it's very costly. So for ongoing maintenance, it is not a good solution. There's also mixed information in regards to how long the cleaning agents are effective once they have dried. And so, as I said, it's a great place to start. It's something that should be done before everybody returns back to the workplace. But for ongoing maintenance, we would not suggest that you consider that. The other thing that should be done now and should be done consistently is dilution ventilation. Plain and simple, get the bad air out. So you should be working with your building operators or your landlords about having them deactivate demand control ventilation to increase our outdoor air to 100% when the exterior conditions allow for that. We recognize that there is an energy hit on this, and that may be difficult for some landlords to handle, but the bottom line is we're focused on safety now, and that takes a precedent going forward. So dilution ventilation, 100% outside air when conditions allow for it, is what you should be doing at all times, and certainly when the building is unoccupied. The other simple upgrade is increasing your filtration. Increase your MERV filters to a higher filtration where possible. Arlene, if you could go to the next slide. And so what we're talking about is increasing from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13, from a MERV 13 to a MERV 15. You can see that in increasing the filtration, you're capturing more particles in the air. Now, please understand that COVID-19 and many other viruses are way too small to be captured by MERV filtration. Where you are effective is when these molecules attach themselves to other airborne particles, which can be caught in the filters. HEPA filtration, of course, is the most effective, but most of our commercial building systems can't handle the pressure drop caused by HEPA filtration. Also, as you increase your MERV filter ratings, you also have to be careful for that pressure drop and the ability of your mechanical systems and the fan motors to effectively deliver air through the space through those higher rated filters. These are the basics. These are the things that your building owners, and if you're building owners, you should be doing right now. Ray is going to get into some of the more active mitigation systems that WB Engineers has been focused on and researching for the past 7 weeks and conducting hundreds of hours of research for our clients across the country on what additional things that they can do moving forward to help protect and improve indoor air quality through their facilities. Ray?
Thank you, Greg. The one thing I'll add as we move to the next slide on filtration, it's one of those transition categories. Do the best thing you can do today that your system is capable of. And then as we transition to more of the long-term strategies, make sure that you don't forget that just because your system can't get to the next level of filtration or 2 levels in increased filtration rating, you might not want to consider that in a long-term strategy study. So I didn't want to jump past filtration too quickly, but the ones that are on the more active mitigation side and are things that you should consider in the long term are UVGI, which is ultraviolet germicidal eradication, PCOs, photocatholic oxidation, ionization, and humidification. So all of those are different strategies, and some can be combined. I'll start with UVGI. The important thing with UVGI is that most people understand ultraviolet rays come from the sun. Turns out they come from man-made lamps as well. The difference is outside, the ozone layer filters the UVA and UVB wavelengths of UV. The UVA and UVB are the ones that get through the ozone layer and actually give us suntans and sunburns. The UVC is what's filtered by the ozone layer. So you really have to think real hard about how you want to apply a UVC lamp in a space or in a air handling unit. They have a lot of testing, a lot of third-party testing, a lot of ASHRAE testing, and they are proven to kill viruses, and specifically they've done tests with SARS. COVID-19 virus is not available to most of the manufacturers to test, but it has a very similar makeup to SARS, and everybody has a very, very high level of confidence that it will kill it. So UVC lamps, the one thing I'd like to talk about is the idea that you could put them in occupied spaces. I think Rich made a comment, there are some people putting these in occupied spaces, and our recommendation from a safety and health standpoint is not to put them in occupied spaces. UVC wavelengths will give you cancer, will damage your retina, and it's not recommended to sit under them. So the idea that you could do it in an unoccupied mode is nice, but typically is also not applicable in most office spaces because of the amount of glazing that there exists, where you could see it from the outside, you could see it through a conference room glass door. And it doesn't turn corners. Light won't get around corners. It won't get underneath of your computer keyboard. It won't get to the arms on your chair if you've pushed your chair in. So there's a lot of these things that make applying UVG or UVGI strategies in occupied spaces not really practical and the best way for people to spend their money. It does have a payback in the case, excuse me, in the case of putting it in an air handling unit. You radiate the cooling coil to keep the mold and bacteria, and in the early days when it was implemented, it was getting rid of Legionella, and it still will do that. So it keeps all of those mold and bacteria particles that would grow in the water on the coil when the moisture condenses. The interesting thing about that is it's not the most effective means to catch the particles. So as a cooling coil is designed to move air across it, the viruses will move across it as well. So I will move to the next strategy.
Ray, if I
is,
could just make one point there. So
sure.
his point is any virus that's coming through in the airstream, well, it doesn't have enough contact time on the UV light in order to damage it or eradicate it. So while there are different ratings of UV light and different intensities, you have to, the design element associated with putting that in your mechanical systems needs to be taken into consideration as you look at your strategy for installing that UVGI technology.
That's a great point, Greg. I'm glad you reminded me of one point. There's a lot of manufacturers and sales companies out there that are promoting putting it in the ductwork, in the long straight runs of ductwork. And to Greg's point, the issue is that it doesn't have enough residence time for those particles that carry the virus to actually kill them. You would need a really, really long length of run, anywhere from 30 to 100 foot length of run of ductwork, and that all depends on the velocity of the airflow in the ductwork. So it makes it a little cost prohibitive, in a lot of cases, just not practical. So there isn't that much space in a lot of buildings to put that kind of straight duct run in. So then going on to the next strategy, this photocatholic oxidation. The interesting thing about this is it's been around a long time as well. And the best parallel for most people is how a catalytic converter works in your car. Catalytic converter is a passive device. It sits in your exhaust system in your car, and it has precious metals in it and baffles. And the heat from your engine is actually the catalyst that helps that catalytic converter work. So as the partially combusted gases that come out of your engine go through into your exhaust, they cross through this catalytic converter. And as the heat from your engine heats up the precious metals, they create something called hydroxyls, which are positive and negative OH ions. Positive and negative OH ions have a half-life of about a half a second, and they're very unstable, and they're very reactive. So what they do is they basically want to get a hold of anything that's a carbon molecule and attach to it and tear it apart, essentially creating CO2 and H2O. There's some very minor other small trace molecules that are created, but the large percentage of the molecules that are created are CO2 and H2O. And that goes in and out your tailpipe. And for everybody that can remember maybe you guys aren't as old as I am, but remember, the period of time when smog was a big thing in California, where, and that's why they were the first ones to add catalytic converters. So moving to the air handling unit systems, if you put one of these systems, the photocatholic oxidation systems, while it's similar to a catalytic converter in your car, it's a much different configuration. As you see in the screen, the middle picture here with the penny in the bottom, this is actually not a filter media. It's titanium alloy with a ceramic coating on it. And the panel that's created by one of the manufacturers that we're working with has an 18-inch deep panel. So on the inlet side, it has the same screen mesh, and on the outlet side, it has the same screen mesh. And the energy in the middle of the panel is a UVC lamp. And that UVC lamp creates the energy to break the hydroxyls off of the titanium screens. And then what it does is it simply does the same thing a catalytic converter does. It takes apart carbon molecules. In this case, we're lucky COVID-19 is a carbon molecule. Other viruses, other bacteria, other molds, other VOCs are all torn apart essentially in the same fashion with the byproduct of CO2 and H2O. And the interesting thing that a lot of people jump to is, well, geez, I don't want to dump a lot of CO2 and H2O into my space. It's at a molecular level. This is at a level that you're talking parts per billion of a breakdown. You can't even measure the difference in CO2 or H2O in the space. The humidity level is not going to change. So that's an active strategy. It works really well in air handling units. It works and is most effective at about 500 feet a minute. For the facilities folks that know that that's the general velocity that air handling units operate. It can be added to return air duct streams or supply air duct streams. It just needs to have more thought put into that duct configuration. It may take a little design to make sure that it functions as efficiently as it should. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that one. That takes a little deeper dive after the presentation. Ionization is the next strategy that I want to talk to you a little bit about, because a lot of people are promoting it, and there's actually people in the market right now that are installing quote unquote ozone generators, which is really bad. EPA has a really hard line on the minimum requirement, I should say the maximum requirement of ozone that can be generated by any product. And putting ozone into the space is completely bad. It's against the code, it's against EPA. Not all ozone ionization systems create an ozone rating that is above the EPA standard. But the way that the ionization systems work, the ones that are, I'll argue, are a lot safer, are the ones that are only creating O2 negative and H positive molecules. And they have a half-life of about 300 seconds. So the way those work is they flood the space, they put them in the supply ductwork system, and they flood the space with these ions. And then it attacks carbon molecules on surfaces and in the air. The percent of effectiveness is sometimes suspect, depending on how the molecules and what percentage you have in the space. So there's questions about the kill rate relative to COVID, because nobody has a sample to test. But the part that concerns me about ionization is not that it may or may not kill 100% of the virus in the space. It's the concern that it does kill carbon molecules and breaks them apart. And as many of you probably know, we're all carbon beings. So all of these particles that are breaking apart viruses are going into our lungs and into our esophagus and sitting on our skin. So the long-term health concern with that type of system is one of the reasons we're not recommending people put it in during an occupied mode. It may have a place in an unoccupied mode to sanitize the space and clean the air. So there's a lot of studies out there being done on both PCOs and ionization. But I find that PCOs are a little safer in that the hydroxyl radical only has a half-life of a half a second and doesn't make it into the breathing zone. So there's a distinct difference between those two. The one that that I really like, and I hope to implement more in new construction, is the idea that humidification, just based on its ability to make the air basically put more moisture into the air, it gives us the ability to have the particles in the air clump to the moisture. So if you can maintain the relative humidity inside of your space between 40 and 60% all year round, you can reduce the airborne transmission of viruses by as much as 40 to 50%. And that's an amazing statistic when you really put your finger on it. The problem is in the winter, in the flu season, the air is dry, and the particles that hold the viruses, if you've seen any of the videos, they can range anywhere from 10 microns to a half a micron. And a half a micron particle can float in the air in suspension, literally, and not move. If you don't have HVAC or a fan or some way to move air through the space, just back to Greg's original comment on dilution ventilation and moving the air and not shutting it off, that particle could float there for days. A nanoparticle at that size, and the virus can sit on that particle. How viral that particle can be and how long it's viral is a question I can't answer. I'm not a doctor, and that's a whole different science. But the fact that it can be alive and be able to be transmitted through the air is quite scary. And humidification allows you to clump those particles together and have them precipitate out and be caught by the filters, so that naturally you've created a better environment with just humidification alone. The real concern is with retrofitting a system that can provide 40% relative humidity in an office building, is that you're going to have a lot of problems in the Northeast with condensation and vapor barriers at the exterior wall. So you could kind of imagine, for anybody that's been in a building that was over humidified in the winter, where you have mold problems in the wall. You know, if a vapor barrier is designed to keep moisture out or keep moisture in, and it has to be designed properly. Most of the older buildings are not capable of maintaining a 40% RH without creating essentially more problems than they would solve. In a new building, a strategy in a new building would be to create an envelope that can support that and give you the chance to have that reduced transmission of airborne viruses. So I'm looking forward to that strategy in the future. In the long range, in the long-term planning, I want to see every building designed with that kind of system. So um, I'm gonna jump from here. I think that was the last piece of information. Greg, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, if I could just add real quick. And so just to, we've done hundreds of hours of research. We're also conducting a living lab scenario for one of our international clients where they've donated workplace to us to install multiple active mitigation technologies, UVGI, PCO, and ionization, where we've partnered with a national environmental hygienist firm who's participating in developing the testing procedures. And we're installing these systems, and we'll be testing these systems for this particular client, and then we'll be publishing our findings. We'll share it with you, Rich, and folks. We would expect those findings to be sometime late next month, so that we can, again, make sure that not just the hundreds of hours of research and looking at individual testing in controlled environments where we get all those results, but what is it going to do really in the workplace in an active mitigation strategy? And so we're excited at WB to see the results of that living lab. And if you're interested in talking to Ray and I further, we'll be in chat room number 3.
Great. Thanks, Greg. If we can have the next slide. So, we've thrown out a lot of ideas, some of which you may have heard before, others maybe not, on both the architectural and the technology and engineering end of the spectrum. But, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for every organization, for the short-term solutions as well as the long-term solutions. So the solutions need to be customized based on the needs of the organization and what you are currently working with and where you see your organization going in the future. So, there are some givens, I think, is that, telework is here to stay for most organizations, even those organizations that were not embracing telework before. But, face-to-face collaboration will look different for the foreseeable future. And I don't know how much of that will carry on beyond, COVID. Again, as NTI was saying, virtual communication will be the new normal. Even informal quick meetings that, where people would come into your office briefly for a quick meeting, that may not be a live meeting as the new normal. It might just be a virtual meeting. New cleaning protocols and the expenses going along with that is something that is certainly going to be in this first phase and second phase as we open up our offices. There will be greater emphasis on efficient space utilization, but it's actually going to be sort of a different type of space utilization based on the way people will need to interact with each other in the future. It doesn't necessarily mean that organizations are going to save a lot on real estate. It just may mean that more space may be dedicated to collaborative areas or larger circulation paths in open work areas. But certainly there's going to be a greater focus on health and wellness. And, I've been communicating with my junior designer staff a lot over the last several weeks. And one of the things that they've been saying to me is that they appreciate the fact that we're concerned, that management is concerned about their health and well-being. And I think that's the message that all of us that are in a management capacity need to let our employees know, is that, we're making decisions not based on, trying to get back to being the profitable company that we were before, but really, promoting health and wellness so that our staff, can remain healthy and be able to be a productive member of the organization. So, let's go ahead and Darlene, if you want to just remind everybody about the breakout rooms, so we can spend a little bit of time with people in breakout room number 1, 2, and 3.
Sure. Before that, I do have somebody put a question out there. Is there any value to deploying air purifiers inside your personal office or office space in general?
I would say that air purifiers in a specific space are an option. There's a bunch of companies that make recirculating HEPA filters. There's a bunch of companies that make recirculating PCO filters. It really comes down to what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to reduce particulate, the HEPA filters are the way to go. It will catch a lot. And if the real issue is how interactive is that space. So your personal space is, you know, if the HVAC system is working, the air is moving, it's not a requirement. Let me say every person should not go out and rush to buy an independent filtration system for their office, individual offices. Let me say that first. But if you have an office where you have a lot of employees that come in and out of it and ask you a lot of questions, and it's very interactive space, then yes, I would suggest that may be a smart move to add another filter system. It could be recirculating on the floor. It could be a unit you put in the ceiling and you have a supply and return that recirculates that air.
But there's
I hope that answered the question.
It recognizes a difference between an air purifying system, commercial air purifier, and a HEPA or PCO system. Remember, the COVID-19 particle size is going to get through most filtration systems that are out there unless it's attached itself to something else. So don't give a false sense of security. Make sure that you're putting in the right technology for the right reasons.
Okay, thank you. We have one other question. Are there any recommendations for improving air quality at home since teleworking is becoming the new norm?
I would highly recommend you do the same thing on the filtration side. A lot of houses do not have outside air ducts connected to them, but when it's nice out, you should open a window or two and get some cross ventilation in your house. That would be healthy. But at a minimum, I would say you want to increase your filtration rating. The real issue with filtration that I'm not sure if we got a chance to touch on is that one filter rating to the next can be a pressure drop of another 1/10 of an inch of water pressure. For the people that don't understand that definition, the only thing that really matters is that you would, just to say you change your filter every 4 to 6 months, if you move to the next filter rating of classification, you're going to change it twice as often. So you're making the air, essentially, if you look at the slide that we had up earlier, 40% better, 4x filtration difference between a MERV 8 and a MERV 13. That's a huge difference in the number of particles reduced and the capture rate. The cost to change your filter out every 3 months instead of every 6 months, in my opinion, is well worth it, and you should consider it. If nobody in your house has COVID-19, you don't have to worry about it recirculating around in the air and getting somebody else sick, right? Because your circle is small. That's why we're all staying at home. But for better indoor air quality in the long run, you should consider this as a smart way to do it. And I know that places like Home Depot and Lowe's all have that next level of MERV filter that will fit in your air handler. You just have to be diligent about your filter changes.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to go into the breakout rooms? If so, put it in the chat and then I can assign you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening.